Something a little different tonight. Next week, we are doing a brand new book. It is called The Case for Christmas. This book went out to all the families, all the households in our church this past week. If you are part of our church, you should have a copy. There are 4 chapters, and each chapter we're tying to one of the 4 Sundays of Advent. So this coming Sunday, Pastor Thomas will be preaching out of the first chapter. He's going to use that as part of his inspiration in his first Sunday of Advent sermon. Second Sunday of Advent, I will be preaching out of with inspiration from the second chapter. And that's going to be on Sunday mornings on all of our normal ways that you can watch our sermon, which is here on YouTube or here on Facebook, as well as you can come and join us in person. And the tie-in to this book does not end. On Tuesday night, starting next week at 7 p.m., if you want to come to the church, you may join us, and we're going to be watching a tie-in movie. Wow, this has a lot of shine on it. So it's by the same guy, Lee Strobel, The Case for Christmas. It is 4 parts. So again, we will be watching it on the 4 Tuesdays leading up to Christmas, and they're differently named than the book. So this will be different information than the book. It will parallel the book, it will connect to the book, but it's going to be different. So we will be showing this in person on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. Our chapters are, so next week we'll be setting the record straight. The following week, the benefit of beneath. I was helping somebody learn with their reading skills today. I might not be the best tutor. Beneath the fake news. Third week, mind-boggling propositions, and then the prophetic fingerprint. So those will be the topics on the Tuesday night at 7 p.m. for the next 4 weeks. And at 7:30 here on YouTube, on Facebook, on my own Facebook, we will be using these to connect to each other. So this is the Case for Christ study guide for the video. There's a whole bunch of really neat things like group questions. I was looking at some of them. Like the first one was, if I can find it, group questions. I just had it open. Something like, what is the best Christmas gift you ever received? What was the most thoughtful Christmas gift you have ever received? Okay, sounds good. Lots of volume. Good. Okay, so with all of this change, we're going to have people in person at the church. They've been part of our Bible study, but because there'll be group questions and there's going to be times where people choose to share, we have not just mic'd myself. I'm now on a different mic. I'm on a lav mic. Alex has his own mic, so we're going to do a sound check on Alex right now because we're testing this all tonight.
So you would like me to speak?
I would like you just to say something.
At my normal volume.
Yeah, don't do anything crazy. Hi, Mom. What is your very favorite Christmas cookie?
I have had, trying to think, my very favorite Christmas cookie is probably, like, as much as I don't normally like sugar cookies or shortbread cookies, the, like, decorated...
With the thick icing?
The green sprinkled Christmas tree ones, or like the Santa hats that have the red sprinkles on them, or those have things like the cutout ones that are in the Christmassy shapes with the sprinkles on them and that. The only time I like them is at Christmas time, but I do like them.
Oh, good, because sugar cookies are my favorite, and I can't wait to make cookies with you this year. Can hear Alex clearly also. Perfect. So we're going to do one more sound test. There is going to be a community mic or a group mic. It's set up. We're testing it again tonight. And so there are 2 ladies with us in person. Can I say your names online? So Margaret is with us and June is with us. And they're both going to answer this question. What's your favorite Christmas cookie or dessert or treat? It doesn't have to be a cookie. Just so that Susie can get sound level tests on you tonight. So what's your favorite cookie, Christmas cookie or treat, Margaret?
My very favorite Christmas cookie is one that my father absolutely loved. It's an oatmeal cookie put together but it's like a sandwich. It's put together with dates.
Ooh.
So kind of like a date square, but more of a cookie.
Yeah, it's a cookie.
That's got a date. Do you still make it? Do you still have the recipe?
Year.
I would love to try one this year.
Okay,
June, what is your favorite Christmas cookie? Oh, I know, it's a hard one. I will just let you know as you're thinking. My mom has answered all of them.
Yes. No, I like the shortbread cookies.
Shortbread cookies?
Yeah.
So there are 3 cookies that come to mind for me when I think Christmas cookies. Like I love sugar cookies. I love shortbread. Christmas doesn't feel like true Christmas until I have the blue Danish butter cookies that come in the tin from the store.
Oh,
Until I've bought one of those tins, it doesn't truly feel like Christmas season yet. I would like to get a small one because I'm trying to cut back on cookies. But one year, I think I was about 7 or 8. I might have the age wrong, but I feel like that was the age I was. Mom and Dad bought one of those best of Christmas, 50 new Christmas recipes. And there were 3 recipes we did that year. The first was a dark chocolate truffle, but you shape them like a little mouse. You put little like almond slivers in the ears in the head to be ears. You put little like silver candies to be the eyes. You put a little like small thing of black licorice to be the tail. And it was this dark chocolate or bittersweet chocolate. Like it was, I never liked the taste of them, but as a kid, I thought they were the best cookies because I didn't like black licorice. I didn't like dark chocolate, but I loved making the mice. So that was the first one. The second one we made that same year was a meringue, kind of like you would make, but you did it in a wreath. So you had your like wreath circle, and then you put little pieces of maraschino cherry and the green cherries cut up to be holly berries and stuff on the top of the wreath. And I loved them. And the last one it was a cross between a sugar cookie and a shortbread, and then you dipped it on the side and sprinkled peppermint on the corner with the chocolate. And those were my 3, and we haven't made them in years. So this year I asked Mom for the recipe. She's photocopied them to me, and Alex doesn't know what he's getting himself into, but he's going to help me bake cookies.
I might play on my computer.
No, I'm not actually strong enough to pipe the meringue. Okay, so how's that soundtrack on everybody, Susie? I don't actually know where Susie has.
I think she's in her office.
Okay, so how's the soundtrack? Are a little quiet, but I'll adjust. Okay, and we do have the mic a little further back from where they are, so good. We've done sound tests, so that was our sound test. All of this starts next week. We will be going through this book, The Case for Christmas. It's going to be actually. Lee Strobel has been on the Christian writing scene for years. Like, I think his first book came out when I was in college, or just before, or just after I was in college. And everybody was reading it. And I just wasn't reading. If it wasn't a textbook when I was in college, I didn't read it. Not because it wasn't good writing, it's just the fact that there was so much you had to keep up on. I just wasn't reading a lot of extra books. And then time just passed, and there were so many other things to continually read that I have never read a Lee Strobel book. So this is going to be my first time. I do not know much about what's going to be inside it. I'm looking forward to reading it with you. So yes, join us next week for book club. Even if you're not able to read the book, even if you're not able to be in person to watch the video, I think there will be elements that will be beneficial to all of us, parts that you can pick up on. So join us next week at 7:30 for book club. We are going to be doing The Case for Christmas. If you would like to come in person, let me know. Announcements.
Just wanted to say, I haven't read the whole book, but I have read the first 4 or 5 pages of that particular book, and I found it very enjoyable for what I had read. So
I'm glad.
I'm looking forward to reading it as well.
I've read the introduction and the first chapter.
And?
I find the first chapter very, well, it's very all
Very theological?
And so I'd have to read it again. I got the gist of it, but it's hard.
Okay.
For me.
I think I only read the introduction, and that's...
I read 3 or 4 pages, and I find it very hard to
He has a very...
understand myself.
He has a very analytical writing style. Mm-hmm. Almost, because of his stories, I wouldn't call it academic writing. He's not writing a paper to get graded on. He has too many personal stories in there. Even the story in the introduction about the little girl whose family, or the family he was helping, and how, like, it was so personable that it's not an academic paper, but because of the level that he's writing at, the parts where he's getting into technical language or very specific language, it does feel dense. That one or two readings are going to be required, or read it so that you have kind of an idea of what some of the topics are, but between the sermon and hopefully our conversation here will help unpack some of that, which I was a student in college who did not like reading my textbook ahead of time because some of it's just the way my ADHD works. I would get lost in the words. But if I went to the lecture where you're supposed to already have it read and he's skimming through it, by hearing the words first, when I went back to my room and read the textbook now made sense. So for some people, I think reading ahead of time is going to be a benefit. Some people, you're going to be like, okay, I've listened to the sermon, I've been here on Tuesday, and now I'm going to read the chapter. And I think for some people, reading it after the sermon is actually going to be maybe more beneficial. So use the book as you choose. Like, I don't think his writing is necessarily for everyone. I definitely think, like, this is, how did I say it to somebody? Like, Christian literature is beneficial, but also it's not gospel. So it has its merits, but if it doesn't speak to you, it's okay to try it out. And okay. That was 10 minutes on our intro. We are so glad that you are here. Let's get into our book. We're going to finish it tonight. So Tongue Pierced has been this book about choosing words that bring us to life and over words that lead to death. And I was very surprised that his last chapter was so small when it was such a huge topic, mastering confrontation and conflict. Until I got into it, I'm like, oh, you're only looking at a very small window of what conflict and confrontation is. So, I think that topic, this specific topic, conflict and confrontation, should be its own book. I'm not the one to write it, but, and I think there's a lot of, unlike last week where there were last week was on cursing, and I agree that when we step into a relationship with Christ and as we grow in Christ, it's going to affect our words. That part and some of his advice on how to curb and end cursing and bad words in our everyday vocabulary is important. If you were here with us, you know that I had some issues with his thing. This week, my issue is very small. It's more, he has taken and made a title that seems to be this big, but he's only looking at this element of confrontation. And he negates or doesn't even touch on other forms of conflict. So, King Solomon says in Proverbs 27:6, wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. The types of conflict he is specifically talking about, or the types of confrontation he's talking about, is what he calls healthy confrontation. And healthy confrontation is a meeting between two friends for the purpose of restoring godliness. And that is the only type of confrontation he addresses in this chapter. So it would be the idea of a friend, watching someone make a choice that is pulling them away from Christ-like living, and I go to them and say, dear friend, please come back to Christ-like living. And that is specifically what he's talking about. An example in the Bible, the one he gives is when King David sins with Bathsheba, Nathanael is called by God to go to David and say, David, let me tell you a story. There was a rich man and a poor man, and they had two sheep. Each had sheep. The rich man had a flock of sheep. The poor man had one sheep that he loved dearly, treated as his own child. The sheep ate at his table. When the rich man had a guest come visit, he took the poor man's sheep stole it, killed it, and fed it to his neighbor. And the king was outraged. I don't know if you're familiar with this David story. Okay, so Nathaniel is told by God to use this story as a metaphor. King David is outraged. How dare this man steal from a poor person? How dare he, when he has so much and is so blessed by God, to do this horrendous, horrible thing? And Nathaniel says, you were that man, King David, because you have all of these blessings from God, and yet you took Uriah's wife and had Uriah killed. And there is so much in this, like God specifically told the prophet Nathaniel to go. But this is the framework he's going to use for confrontation. It doesn't come up in his chapter, but there are times that comes in the New Testament. One of the ones that I think about, it's in Acts, and I don't know where. But Peter is visiting a church that has both Jewish Hebrew Christians in it that have allowed Gentile Christians to come. And Peter is eating with the Jewish Christians and the non-Jewish Christians because they are all one in the community of Christ. Now, some men come down from Jerusalem to hang out, and they have some authority, and they start saying some things. And Peter, maybe under peer pressure, maybe wanting to show that he is a godly man, for whatever reason, starts to separate and avoid the Gentile Christians, no longer eats with them. And Paul comes, and he might not actually be in Acts. It might be in Philippians, if you are looking it up.
I'm trying to.
Okay, but Paul says, I went to Peter and instructed him, this is not how it should be. If there is grace for all, so Paul went to Peter and said, you're not doing this right. You're not living a godly life. So he specifically, for this chapter, is looking at those type of situations. When do I go to a Galatians 2.
So neither
Galatians. Well, I started realizing as I was talking that I had learned it when I was taking a course by the Shawn Institute, and I thought the book we were studying was Philippians, but obviously it was Galatians because that's where I learned it. Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Mom, for knowing the things. I'm glad you know the things. Okay. So there's no, he first puts it, note the parts of the definition. First, healthy confirmation happens between two people who care about each other. So in this conversation, it's specifically somebody you are friends with, have a relationship with. I think this goes to the biblical idea of speak truth in love. If I do not have a relationship with someone, I do not have the grounds to go and confront them about a sin in their life. Which, this is not talked about, that verse always makes me think of Christians who protest at places like a gay pride with, your sin is going to send you to hell. Like, you do not have a relationship with these people. You are pointing out their sin with no love for them. Because if you loved them, that's not how you would communicate the truth of God's love. It's easy sometimes to talk about how somebody's doing it wrong over how somebody... So like, that's an example where they are not confronting in a healthy way. They haven't built a relationship. They're not actually... It seems to be a place of pride. I want to show you how I'm right and you're wrong. That's not the language they would use about it, but there's a pride thing. I know God and you don't. You are the problem. And when we come in with that arrogance, we are not being friends. We're not being loving. We're not trying to lovingly bring people to Jesus. So a confrontation of this nature might be between friends, family members, coworkers, as long as the two people in the confrontation know and respect each other. Which means He is not going to be talking about confrontation when it's with a neighbor that doesn't like you or a coworker that is rude. Like he's got a very narrow window on this one. Someone who isn't a friend has no reason to listen to, and specifically talking about me going to them, has no reason to listen to anything you have to say. You haven't earned the right to speak into his or her life, so confrontation of any kind will likely just deteriorate into an argument or be ignored altogether. So I think if we really want to get into the heart of true conflict resolution, he's not the one to read from. And I think that might be a really beneficial conversation. How do I stay Christ-like in my words when I need to talk to my coworker who is repeatedly coming in late, or a neighbor who continually blocks my driveway? Like, I'm trying to think of things that are small, but they add up over time. How do I explain to my spouse who doesn't go to church when he or she mocks my faith? It harms me. Like, now that one is often, hopefully spouses will have a love and respect for each other, but not every relationship's healthy. So if you are watching this and have a book that you know of that deals with this issue of true confrontation and conflict, please pass it along. So that's the first thing he says. For you to be going to somebody to speak into their life about an error, a sin, a way that they're walking away from God, you need to love them. You need to have a relationship with them. You need to respect them. And hopefully that's reciprocated, because why would they listen to you? The second thing for healthy confrontation is geared to a specific purpose, restoring godliness. This is a critical part of the definition. You shouldn't confront someone just because they have offended you in a way or because you think they need to change their behavior. The heart of it needs to be deeper than that. Is what they're doing pulling them away from God? Healthy confrontation can only happen when the need for it grows out of something that is a sin in God's eyes. The goal of healthy confrontation isn't to elicit an apology for you or get someone to live more in line with how you think they should live. It's to help a person you're confronting realign themselves with God's way and God's best. Okay, so that's where he's starting from. And once I realized that that is the heart of this chapter, I went, okay, I now understand how you're going to get conflict and confrontation done in one chapter, because you're only looking, again, at a very narrow thing. Still important. There are many times, I remember when I was at a church in the past, it was not in this province, so there's no speculation, but somebody who had been working in a position of leadership in our children's ministry with 40 other people had put up on Facebook that she and her boyfriend were pregnant. And isn't this great news? And I had half the church, specifically the leadership of this one group that we were working with, come to me, go, you need to fire a volunteer. How can they be working with our young women and announcing that they're pregnant and they're not married? I had another half of the group going, we need to show grace, and how do we do this? And it was this chapter, this specific chapter was the chapter I needed at the time, because I had have you ever tried to fire a volunteer? How do you say, you who come and give your time freely and are good friends with the children you're ministering to are no longer welcome because you're living in sin? And at the time, our church hadn't been keeping up with a code or a policy of sign that you will live these principles. So we didn't even have a signature saying that anyway, it was messy. That's all I'm going to say. It got messy and it was no fun and it didn't go well. And that was something that was just unpleasant for everyone. And knowing there are some things that came out that would they weren't in a place to be confronted. But this chapter would have helped me handle some of those pitfalls a bit better. So the art of confrontation. How do you feel when you hear the word confrontation? What do you like? Does your skin start to get creepy and crawly? Do you enjoy it? What is, I like that head shake. How do you feel about confrontation? I have a friend who thrives on it, if it's on his terms. He loves a good debate. He loves the argument. He loves the bolster, and like it's his wheelhouse. So a good row is something they enjoy. And if it's somebody who also enjoys a good row, and then they can, now they're not Christ followers, so if they can go for a pint afterwards, all the better. That's not how I that is not how I handle conflict. I dread it. I truly do. Because I can see all the ways it's going to go sideways fast. That's okay. So Debbie says, does not enjoy confrontation. I believe Susie saying, nope, not at all for confrontation. You said no for confrontation.
I mean, I've had to deal with it many times because I owned a store, and when you own a store, you have to deal with disgruntled customers. You have to deal with staff that don't follow policies or don't realize they're not following policies or whatever else. So you have to deal with it. But it was never a favorite time for me.
Yeah. And again, I think that is the situation where I would like a book. A book to talk about what happens when somebody's accosting you. How do you diffuse situation? How do you speak love when you're not in the wrong? Like all of those, again, not this chapter. Okay, so he says, are you scared of confrontation? Most people are. And I realize there's actually probably 3 or 4 different responses. Some of us, knowing that there's a need to speak into somebody's life or seeing that there is something, are going to hate the idea so much that we now avoid the situation. So we either smooth things over and pretend there's no problem, or we avoid that person. That is one form of fear, that we will just let somebody else take care of it. And in a lot of ways, those people that came to me and said, you deal with this person, I'm like, you're the head. I guess I'm the kids pastor, but you're the head of this ministry. Why am I the one being I will put my big girl pants on and do the thing? But it was passing the buck. So sometimes that's how we let somebody else deal with that. As my friend who likes a good row, some people thrive on it. And maybe not confrontation, but like the debate, the argument, and I've been there, like in my last church, like there was a couple people who would like to get into the, oh, pastor, you were wrong about that sermon point. Okay, this makes me uncomfortable. Can you wait till Tuesday to tell me that I was wrong in my sermon, not 4 minutes after I gave the sermon? But there are people that do enjoy coming at you. To go to a protest, you kind of have to be, like, there are people that can engage and speak up. And then I think there's some other probably middle ground reactions. One of the first meals, actually the very first time I met your family, somebody at the table just said something. It was a joke that was sexist, and one of the other members, like, they didn't bat an eye, they didn't make a big deal of it, but they said, no, that's not appropriate right now. That is not true. And the conversation just kept going. And it was smooth and quick, and like, he didn't blink an eye. The person who had said the off-color joke didn't blink an eye. And I was just kind of going, like, you know, when you're meeting a new family, I didn't know how that, like, I'm like, this is either going to blow up. I didn't know how, and it was just a really smooth confrontation that ended in no conflict. And I think I'm probably the only person who remembers that moment because it was so bizarre to me. So I think there are some it's just something that happens. If we are afraid to speak up, that we might offend, or we might do the wrong thing, or that we might be ending a relationship we value with a person, because that's something that can happen, or that will look foolish or judgmental. I know sometimes that last one really gets me from calling somebody out. Even as a pastor, sometimes being the one to say, you're not, or have you looked at this element of your life? Are you avoiding God? It my tummy gets in knots and I'm like, that's exactly what I'm like. So all of those things are possible. They shouldn't keep us from stepping out into a healthy confrontation. So Susie just shared, like, I worked with a guy, so this is Susie's words, I worked with a guy who you needed to butt heads with once in a while to get along. We're reading Anne of Green Gables. No, we're into Road to Avonlea. Anne of Avonlea. And there's one student, Anne is trying so hard to win over and love, and she has refused to whip. Now, this is, again, written in the
1910s, 1915s, something around that time
I
period.
think it's published 1908. So somewhere there, like there was a different view of corporal punishment, but she's convinced she's not going to whip. And one day she's just having a bad day. I think she had a toothache, and so it wasn't an intentional thing, but she snapped and she gave him a whipping. And after that, he adored her because he didn't think a woman could be as good as a male teacher, but since she could whip as good as a man, I might as well listen to her. And after that, the kid was like. So again, there's some confrontation that happens in a way you never expected. I do not advocate whipping children, but I did always find that an interesting part from Road to Anne of Avonlea. Okay, when we look at Jesus's life, we see that he had a boldness, that he spoke for truth, told people how it was. He called the Pharisees vipers. Like that's kind of a big one. And stood his ground. He was asked to go see his parents. His mom and his brothers had come because they were thinking he was getting too uppity and they didn't like the attention he was bringing to their family. And so they went to like quiet him and bring him away so he would stop teaching. And Jesus said, "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers? Here, the people who believe." And that is a form of confrontation in a lot of ways. So Jesus did it boldly, but with love, and ultimately for the purpose of restoring godliness. There is an art to this kind of confrontation, both in knowing when it should happen and how to go about it. And sadly, I am not Jesus. Neither are you yet. Like we are becoming Christ-like, but we are not all there yet. And even Nathaniel, Nathaniel was told by God, and sometimes we don't get that word from God. So how do we know when to confront? You and I, okay, this is what he says. You and I aren't prophets and probably won't be rubbing shoulders with kings soon because he's just gone through the story that I said at the beginning. Still, there are 5 practicalities we can glean from Nathaniel's confrontation of David to help us engage more effectively in healthy conflict when it's called for. The first one is follow God's lead. Before you confront anyone, make sure God is the one leading you into the encounter. Don't jump too quickly. So this takes prayer, takes time, takes patience. There's a story I recently learned about a pastor who grew up in a stanchiation church. Essentially, they do not believe that God speaks today. God spoke in the Old Testament, God spoke in the New Testament, but the gifts of God and his ability to speak ended then. We have the word and that is it. And so for this pastor, he did not believe God speaks today, did not believe in the gift of tongues. There's a few other things he didn't believe. And there was a woman who God had been showing different ways in his church who was praying for him. And she wanted to say, "Pastor, you're wrong. I speak in tongues. God speaks to me. Let me show you how." And God said, "Nope, hold on to that." Now the pastor was being led by God into some new things. He went to a conference and he's like, "I don't know what to do with this." So he went to another pastor in his denomination, and the pastor's like, "Yeah, I've moved away from that what we were taught in university. Here is what God's been doing. And so you should read this book, you should read this book. And so about a year to 2 years after this woman first felt like she needed to confront her pastor and God said, nope, hold on to it. He came to her and he's like, Grace, this is what's going on in my life. And I think God's doing this and I don't know what to do with it. And she's like, well, this is what I believe. And let me show you why and how. And he's like, whew, like he was ready for it. So there is a time where God says, don't confront yet. Especially if it's a drawing them to God. Like if the purpose, we need to be on God's timeline. And then there's times where like God sent Nathaniel. So there is times where God will send us. Confrontation is something you should decide to do flippantly. We need prayer. We need forethought. In fact, when you think you need to confront somebody, the wisest thing you can do is pause and critically evaluate whether or not a confrontation is truly the best course. Often it's not. I've found that about 80% of the time, when people think they need to confront another person, the confrontation actually isn't needed. When you make yourself part of the statistic, you cause unnecessary hurt and strife. That one I found really thought-provoking. Yeah. If you are looking forward to the confrontation, letting them know what's going on, giving them what they're due, all of those things, you're probably not the right person to go. Not the person God's sending. If you're looking forward to it, you're probably on a mission to prove yourself right or prove the other person wrong. You need to, maybe there's a heart issue that you need to take care of with you and Jesus. Likely looking out for more of your own interests than the interests of the other person. When you read the account of Nathaniel confronting David, there's absolutely no sense of excitement. It's a heavy heart that he goes and says, King, there's a sin in your life. He wasn't interested in proving a point or making himself feel like a better person. He engaged in the confrontation solely because God was leading him, which means we can do the same thing. Questions to ask. Is the person you think you need to confront dishonoring God? In other words, is he or she behaving in a way that would make people think less of God? If what he's doing is confusing God's message or marring his name, then it may very well be time for a confrontation. Question 2. Are this person's action damaging your relationship? In what the other person is doing, creating a divide between the two of you. Here's a tricky part you have to consider before entering into confrontation. The confrontation itself could potentially end the relationship. Some people don't take well to being confronted and will never forgive you for calling them out, even if godliness is ultimately restored. Just another reason to make sure a confrontation is absolutely necessary before barreling ahead. Question 3. Are the person's actions hurting others? Are other people being affected by what's going on? In King David's case, he wasn't only hurting himself and Bathsheba, he was also threatening the whole nation of Israel. With so much desperation, God had to send Nathaniel to make it stop. And lastly, is the person you want to confront hurting himself? Does she seem to be self-destructing or spiraling out of control? Is he doing damaging or dangerous activities that hurt himself? Often somebody caught in a cycle of sin can't see the personal consequences piling up. So those are 4 questions that you can ask, like, why am I doing this? Don't even begin to move in a direction of confrontation without asking and answering these 4 questions. As you do, be on the lookout for God's confirmation. If he truly wants you to confront someone, he will confirm it through prayer, the study of his word, and or other people. You can save yourself and others a lot of pain by slowing down and making sure you're following God's lead before you enter the confrontation. I wonder how many times us going slower would have just made things so much better. Just in general. Okay. His next step is request a private meeting. I would do step 3 first. So we're going to talk about step 3 and then request a private meeting. Prepare to tactfully share your thoughts. So this is his third step. I'm suggesting that it's your second. So he says, once your meeting is scheduled, it's time for some prep work. So if you have decided that you're going to confront, you need to prepare before you make your meeting, in my opinion. He has a different opinion, which means there's definitely room for it could go either way. Make the meeting and then prep, and then make the meeting. First, do a little self-examination. And this is why I think this is your next step. Is your own heart in check? There is a parable Jesus tells about before you take the speck out of the other person's, like, check the log in your own eye. Is your heart in the right place? Are you committing a similar sin, or maybe a more egregious sin that you have been blind to? Are you guilty of the same type of offense, or of some other sin that could cloud your ability to see the situation clearly? Think about Jesus' words, and then he does the friend eye. It's Matthew 7:5. Ask yourself if you are the right person to do the confrontation. And in a lot of ways, like going back to the example I gave of my own story, it was wise for most of those people to push it up to the highest authority in our spectrum of the ministry. I was the pastor over the volunteers who worked in children's ministry. I was the one to do this. So like there are times where you might not be the right person. Another example, female A, let's name her Sally, may be aware that male friend, I don't have a male friend name that's just loose. Fred. Sally and Fred are friends. She might be aware that he's engaged, and she might be aware that he is very much into adult watching material. And sorry, I don't know what I want on Facebook, so we're just not going to say the word. But, adult content. And it's actually affecting his future wife and his intimacy. Sally might not be the best person to confront because of the different genders in this relationship. Also, the fact that he's engaged to somebody else. Like, there's a number of things. Sally is not potentially the right person to go make this confrontation. Maybe she passes it on to male friend. Maybe she just prays and God sends somebody else. Maybe she goes to the pastor of their church and says, or maybe not the pastor, but an elder or a friend or sometimes you are not the right person, even if you're aware of the situation. With that, just like the story of Grace I said, Grace wasn't the right person because God said, hold on. Okay. If you feel like you are, it's time to take your preparation to the next level. And this is why I say don't schedule the meeting until you know that, like, yes, there's no sin in my life. Yes, God wants me to be the one to do it. Like, don't even make your meeting yet. You could, and then God say, don't confront them, and then you just go out and have a nice cup of coffee. Why would you drink coffee, though? Hot chocolate all the way. This next one is, and this is where he makes a really interesting thing. I would never have considered this. Because I don't always like writing out my words, I often, even when I preach, I'll put key quotes and key phrases I want to use, and everything else just rambles. I did not write notes about this. The most notes I have is paragraphs that I have pre-underlined. Like, that's my level of preparation. But he says, write out everything you want to say. There's a lot riding on what comes out of your mouth. Before the meeting, sit down and write out word for word exactly what you want to say. If you spill into finger pointing or negativity, redirect yourself into constructive words. This helps you to prepare the battle plan. I'm using the word battle plan. He does not. But you do not know your way through this word maze until you write the words out. This is how you get to avoid words that are going to seem condemning and finger pointing or I'm right, you're wrong, because God can help you through the editing process. If you think writing preparation is too much trouble, then circle back to step 1 and consider whether God is the one leading you to this confrontation. This is serious business. A healthy confrontation demands and deserves a written preparation. And again, this is where I was like, oh yeah, right. Not everybody's a writer. Not everybody likes using the words this way. And he makes a really good point in this next part. This is where he turned me around to his opinion. Taking this step will not only allow you to craft the confrontation in a way it should go, it will also serve as a final confirmation that confrontation is necessary. Susie just went, oh, Liz, you don't know what you're missing. Coffee is the elixir of life.
Where is it then?
Okay. I think I said Susie said it, but it was Stuart who said he used to work with a guy who butt heads. I just saw the Hoftizer. I apologize, Stuart, if I mixed up who was who. So this is his story. Not long ago, I felt I needed to confront a friend of mine about an issue that had come between us. Tried following Nathaniel's lead, so he started working through the very steps that he has outlined in this chapter. I had already thought through what I wanted to say. Writing it down seemed like a waste of time, and that's where he's pulling me into the, okay, so I'm not the only one who feels like this is just an extra unnecessary step. And here's why it's an important one. But I did it anyway, and it ended up making me very glad. As I made myself put my thoughts in paper, I came to a realization that I didn't need to confront my friend at all. What was needed is I needed to forgive him. Writing is a clarifying exercise. Seeing the words that have been swirling in your mind, in your head, captured and pinned to a piece of paper on a screen brings new perspective. Flannery O'Connor famously said, I write because I don't know what I think until I read what I say. I write because I don't know what I think until I read what I say. And so this last step, this write it out, really does matter, I think. This is maybe the best thing, not even for confrontation with somebody, but if you are preparing to talk to your boss about something, needing a raise, if you are angry at somebody, writing it out and not sending the letter helps you formulate your, I think I even gave this advice to 2 different university students who were just inconsolably stressed because they were staring at a blank space. Write everything you want to say down. Go away for an hour, come back, and now you have something on a page to edit. You can't make it good until there's words on the page. I write because I don't know what I think until I read what I say. The simple act of writing out what you're thinking and feeling about your proposed confrontation will allow you to see the situation with fresh eyes. And he's got this one right. Relationships are messy. It's easy to get caught up in the chaos and think you need to approach others about something they've done, when what you really need to do is being willing to make allowances for their weaknesses and mistakes. Not everything that we think needs to be a confrontation needs to be a confrontation.
What's it? Love people for who they can be, but accept them for where they are right now?
Yep. You are not on mic, silly. Okay. Say it one more time.
If I remember correctly, it was love people for who they can be, but accept them for who they are right now.
It was something we said from a meme a couple weeks ago. It's not in the book, but it's that idea that allow people to continually fail and still hope for who they could become. One of the ways God grows us is by putting us around other people who think differently than us or rub us the wrong way. So there are times where the confrontation doesn't need to be a confrontation. Instead of jumping towards confrontation with those people, when they offend us or cause a problem, we may need to just step back and create space for grace in the situation. As it turns out, that's exactly what I needed to do with my friend. Again, that's the author. Sometimes I would have something I would have realized too late if I was not willing to sit down and write out what I thought. Okay, so then, again, this was his third point. I'm going to now jump to his second point. Set a time, a place in a private meeting space. To be effective and maintain your relationship with the schedule a time to sit down with them privately. You can't conduct a healthy confrontation in the presence of other people. If you try to, you will rob the other person of the opportunity to be vulnerable and hear what you're saying. There's often times where I try to have those meetings with people out in a place that's neutral, like a coffee shop. But for a confrontation like this, you do want to go somewhere else, somewhere where it can be just the two of you. And I don't even have great examples for you right now. Like a pastor has a pastor's office and a church that they can use. But there aren't a lot of spaces where we can just go be neutral, like visiting them in their home or your home can be that private place, but at the same time can make it awkward if they don't want to leave and you're ready for the conversation to be done, or vice versa. So this is where I think we need God's grace. Does he say anything else useful? No. If the person you're confronting refuses to hear you out, there are other measures that Jesus describes in Matthew 18. But let's start by sitting down for a one-on-one. No, he doesn't give anything else useful. I'm sorry, it's just not useful. I have nothing to say. Yeah. So finding a place where you can be private. One of my friends, when talking to youth, says car rides, especially for them going to a doctor's appointment, or I need to go into the store because they're trapped and they can't jump out of the car. But I've also noticed even with youth, like over the last 5-6 years, even when I was a youth pastor in Nova Scotia, there are things teens will tell you when they're in the car because they don't have to look and make eye contact with you. And what I've even noticed is they really want somebody to talk to, but they don't want to start it. So often a teen will drop the bombshell 4 minutes before I drop them off at their house. I'm like, we've been in a car for an hour. We could have started this really good conversation a long time ago. Anyway, cars, especially young parents, your teens will probably talk to you more when you're in a car ride, especially as they get older, because it's less direct, it's less intimidating. Tell the truth, point 4. Tell the truth compassionately and leave the rest to God. So the thing with Nathaniel, he didn't go in and say, "You're sinning, David." He started with this parable, and it was given to him by God. It says, God told Nathaniel to say. So I think there's that same... Susie points out a drive in a car or a walk in a neutral place or a not in a woods would be a neutral place. Stuart points out the car doesn't work with teens if they have what if we all just get one of those Wi-Fi or cell service and demobilizing devices in our car? No cell service.
All cars have a priority cage.
Yeah.
No signals.
No signals. So Nathaniel, being our example, didn't point a finger saying, look at what you've done, you wretched, wretched person. He tactfully and compassionately brought David to a place where David could understand what he had done, and brought him to a place of humility before God. He brought him, one of the easiest mistakes to make in confrontation is to keep, I missed a line. He chose his mouth and trusted God to do the restorative work. So he told the story, he said the truth, and then he waited on David. And it's confrontation. Sometimes the best thing we need to do is shut our mouth. Once you've said what you've wanted to say, because you wrote it down ahead of time. Fight the natural inclination to fill the awkward space. It's interesting. As a pastor, I've been often told, let there be space so questions get answered. And some people need that extra time to process what's being said, to ponder, to listen. And there's always one or two people that don't do well with silence, and they just need to like speak into the silence the whole time. I know, because I'm one of those. Or they're quick with their answers always. And so I naturally sometimes, like, I have to fight there and just go, just don't answer the question. Give them more time. It's really awkward in your head, but it's not awkward for anyone else. Just shut up, Liz. As you trust God in the situation, it allows him to have the space to do the work God wants to do. And it allows the other person to recognize the few times I've had much needed people who have spoken into my life that one of them I was really offended because they didn't do all these things. They just said, Liz, you're being bitter about this. My back, like, I'm like, yeah, I'm bitter. Like I was like a porcupine whose all my quills went up. And it took me about 3 days to go, but she's saying that, like, she did not say it out of love, but she did say it because she loved me. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's a slight difference in there. It was not loving how she said it. It was definitely pointing a finger. There were things, we were both young. But the point was, it took me about 3 days to come to a place of, and bitterness hinders my relationship with God. So, offer grace and support. This is his last one. Confrontation isn't about rubbing somebody's nose in what he or she did wrong. It's not airing their dirty laundry out in public. It's definitely not sharing it in gossip. And it's not position yourself as morally superior. This is your chance to walk alongside a wounded companion on this road of life. And I'm thinking of warriors that we've just gone through Remembrance Day, and you see the pictures of soldiers helping carrying an injured member of the platoon back to safety. That is what we're doing. So this is where we are happy with those who are happy and weep with those who weep. His last one is, what happens when you are the one that is being confronted? Because, as I just said, there are things in our lives that other people God will use to iron sharpens iron, and sometimes that we are the ones that need to be. Okay, I didn't highlight anything because I just went, yeah, that's true. His big one is, do you have a Nathaniel in your life? Do you have somebody who can speak into your life and say, hey, you're not doing well. Let me carry you as I point out this. Do you have someone you allow into your inner circle whom you trust enough to call you out when necessary? Would you be able to humble yourself enough to hear words that your Nathaniel had to say, to recognize that God is working and trying to do it through him? These are questions worth asking, because the day may very well come when you find yourself on the other side of confrontation, needing someone to speak into your life. Yes. Hebrews 12:5-6 says, my child, don't make light of the Lord's discipline, and don't give up when he corrects you. For the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he punishes each one he accepts as a child. So if somebody comes to you, recognize it's painful. I never like when God points out my sin to me. It always makes me want to respond like Eve and Adam and hide somewhere, or deny, or excuse, or whatever. Like, that's your initial response. There is a phrase we use in theology to talk about that moment right before we accept Christ, and it's called a crisis of faith. Like, right before we accepted Jesus, we are confronted with our sin, and we have this crisis of faith. What are you going to do with that? And we either accept Jesus or we walk away. And there's a lot of conversations where, like, because once you're saved, you're always saved. or once you're saved, you're part of God's family. You are on this journey. But there are, sorry, mic pack just fell. We will just set that there. I think there are times throughout our, there's this progression of God saved you the moment he saved you. You are his child. He loves you enough that he will never let you go. He also loves you enough that you can walk out of his hands. So there are times where he brings more of these moments of conviction or this, and you have to come through it again. You have to work through that. Yeah, I surrender this specific sin sometimes, or this area of my life. And that is where your Nathaniel comes in. Okay, that is the chapter. We're going to skim through the next one really quick because we are 1 minute over. But we did spend 10 minutes talking about this book, which we'll be doing next week. The last word is essentially, don't forget, words are important. Say things that matter. That's the whole thing. He gets a little more nitty gritty. He says, there are words and phrases that stay with us, quotes that we know that resonate in a generation because words can matter. Words matter because they influence us. So use your words to bring hope to those who are struggling. Use your words to confront injustice. Our natural tendency is to speak the opposite of hope when somebody's struggling. Saying things like, I told you so, or instead of encouraging you, we point out their mistakes or how they could have done things better. And sometimes we just need to give them hope where they're at. Yeah. I'm going to put a pin in that because I had a thought for should-haves and could-haves don't help anyone going through a hard time. I was reading with a young person today who's struggling with reading, and telling them when they've got a word wrong isn't going to be helpful. But applauding them every time they get the words right goes a lot more, goes further with them grasping the English language and feeling confident to pick up the next book. Also, I want to say, I'm really proud of this child that I was reading with today. So if you've ever learned that, when, especially a young reader, if they can read the page and make 5 or less mistakes, it's about where they're at. If they make no mistakes, then we need to find something slightly more challenging. So we read through one book that they were going to sign up from the library, and they had about 3 words that they really struggled with. So that's one of the books. And they had picked another book, and after looking, I'm like, let's see this one. And this child looked at it and went, I think that one might be for a later time. And I'm like, I'm so proud of you for recognizing the font was smaller. It's probably 2 grades above where they're at. And I was just really proud of them. Use words to confront injustice. The example is Martin Luther King's I Had a Dream, is seared into our collective cultural conscious, not because of his eloquence or his poetry, but because of the courage it took to speak them. And that's, be sensitive to the injustice God brings to your attention, so you can use your words to bring light into dark situations. You can use your words to express faith in God. And the last word is, it seriously says, your words matter. Words matter. So with that, we are done the book. Tongue pierced. It is done. Thank you for sticking with us. Yay! So, I really do like this book. There's so much about this book that definitely, if you liked it, I would say there is a YouVersion 5-day Bible study that you can pick up and do for free on the YouVersion Bible app. Most of the earlier chapters I appreciated more. The last 2, specifically the one we did last week, felt out of place or not as much. Tonight was good, but it feels like the first step in a whole novel, or not novel, but it only seems part of one aspect of confrontation. There's
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
Last week, the study, it sort of bothered me after I got home, because when it said, like I say, oh my God, so often, but it's not in a mood that's saying it to God. Like, it's when something bad happens on TV and you see these floods and that, I always say, oh my God, and I've always said that all down through my life, oh my God. And I just felt it was like a feeling that I was calling on God for help. But now, last week when I heard it, you shouldn't say that, it made me feel, I don't know how to explain it, but it made me feel like I was saying something bad that I shouldn't be saying.
And I think, okay, so let's stop and talk about that one for a second. So I think there are some people who, when we say, oh my God, it is that, oh my God, car accident, God be with, like, it is a cry for help. It is a prayer in the moment. I work with teens, and oh my God has become, well, like, the tone is like, oh my God, look at what you're wearing. Like, it's not about God. It's not about asking for help. It's not praying. And it is definitely become this throwaway, not that God's a throwaway, but this phrase, and I'm not saying this is how you use it, but it has become a throwaway term. How many times do I tell the teens, hey, at the table, like we're playing a board game together, and they'll just say, oh my God, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, hey, that's my faith. Please show some respect. And they didn't even know, because it's not a bad word by society standards. And I think that's the one he's talking about. So I think my opinion on this one is, each time you say it, you need to check what was going on. Has this just become the phrase I say when something happens, or am I calling out to God on behalf of the situation? Is it a throwaway? I'm just using the word God as a filler, or as I'm shocked.
That's what I feel. Like, when you see these things, you do feel sympathy for these people, and you feel shocked. But I didn't know that I was saying it in a way that I shouldn't, because when you say, oh my God, when you hear of somebody dying, or if you hear of a car crash that somebody's been killed in, my first expression, oh my God, help them, it's not.
And I think, so there is a different
meaning to it for me to say it.
And there is much in society. I don't know when the last time you listened to a sitcom, but using God's name, not in a prayerful way, not even in a calling out, not in it's just a filler, like, oh shoot, oh darn, oh, well, I could get into some, but like, it is on parallel with those. And that's, if I've been around teens too much in a week, because it is so much part of their vocabulary, I catch myself saying it in the same way they use it. And that's when God's like, you got to pay more attention to your words, because your words matter.
Yeah, and a lot of the times it's the intonation of how you say it.
Yeah. Like, totally. Oh my.
Yeah, exactly.
I could be a very good valley girl.
And a lot of the young people, they use that, and you know that's not, that they are.
Well, and since God and faith, to many in our society who have not grown up in the church, is irrelevant. Most Canadians, if they're not an immigrant family, lean towards agnostic or atheist. I don't know if there's a God, or I do not believe there is a God. So I'm not being sacrilegious. Don't care. There is no being. I'm not offending or hurting anybody. We who are following Christ go, but the first commandment is love the Lord your God, and do not take his name in vain.
That's right.
And
Yeah, but I wasn't feeling that it was taking his name.
well, I'm saying that's why I'm saying there's a distinction. Like
Yeah.
you and God are the only two who know what your heart motive is. But when we were talking about it last night, I'm definitely talking about this class of use.
Right.
And there are times where I use it. Oh my Lord. Oh Lord. Like it's definitely a cry for help. And there are times, if I've been around teens, it is definitely more of a frivolous throwaway, which means I've taken something sacred and used it in the mundane. And that is when we use God's name not as it's intended. And only you know it, like, if it's, only, and God. I mean, God sometimes convicts us. Sometimes if we've never even caught it. I remember I was at youth camp, and damn is not the beaver place. Like, to damn something was never a word that had fazed me. It was not you could say it at school, so it's not a bad word. And I was at youth camp, and it was a very heated game of capture the flag. And I got tagged with the flag 4 steps before my base. It was a big thing. And I yelled that word very loudly. And I had 3 counselors yelling at me for saying a bad word. Like, not yelling, but like it was big. And I'm like, but I had no idea that was a bad word. Like, and then I changed my language around that one. Like, it just had never fazed me. So there are teens, I think, and others in society who come into Christian life, and they could be Christians for 10 years and then have a sermon or a message like the one we had last week and finally go, wait, what? I didn't know that was bad. Mm-hmm. I know of a pastor in Nova Scotia. Actually, he was one of my professors, and he led somebody to the Lord in prison. And the guy stood up and he said, I've got Jesus in my heart, and F that's good. Like for him, instant change. And it did not affect his language yet. Like, he just celebrated the way he knew to speak. Like, so.
That's what I have to do then. Celebrate it.
So.
Oh God, I love you.
Yeah. We're done tongue pierced. Next week, we will be back at 7:30. We're going to be doing a group discussion book. It's The Case for Christmas. If you are in the greater North Grenville Community Church area, we do invite you to come at 7 because we're going to be showing the first of this video series that the group discussion's connected to. So that will be fun. We'll be in person, tons of talking, less of me. You'll still see my face, but there'll be more talking with other people. We did a mic test earlier, which is why you can hear everybody else's voices so well. Thank you to Susie for making the sound work. And I think that's all of the things. Join us this coming Sunday. We will be lighting the Advent wreath and starting the case for Christmas. I'm so excited for Christmas. May I play for you? God, we thank you for all of us who have gathered over the last 9 weeks, for the ways that you have challenged us and the ways you have brought the importance of words to our lives. And I pray for this upcoming Christmas season, for those who have gotten this Case for Christmas book, for us to have insight. Pray for Pastor Thomas right now as he's working on this first sermon series sermon. And I pray for next week, for those who will be included in our group discussion. God, may it all be to your glory, and may we remember to use words that matter, that give life. Amen. Amen. I am so thankful for each and every one of you, especially you, like all of you. Yes, you all make this happen, and the discussion is only good because you're all here. So may you be richly blessed by God this week, and we will see you next week.